Good morning, everybody. My name is Glenn Harrington, and I'm with the United States Environmental Protection Agency based in Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. For me, coming here to Dubai, to Eye on Earth, and having the opportunity to meet face-to-face with folks that are specializing and working in data and IT at the intersection of environment has been a really valuable experience, and then also to kind of hear more in depth about some of the projects that different folks have been working on has been very interesting. And today we have with us Mike Gill. Mike comes here all the way from Canada. Mike is the Director of Biodiversity Indicators Programme at NatureServe and co-chair of the group on Earth observations at the Biodiversity Observation Network. And Mike will be presenting on the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership Dashboard, tracking trends for conservation. So without further ado, Mike, take the floor. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Glenn. First off, I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be here in Dubai and give my thanks to the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi for sponsoring this and the convening partners. And also, I think it's worth pointing out that Derek and a number of people behind the scenes are doing a great job of organizing all these complicated events. So thank you very much. So what we want to do today is introduce and profile a developing platform, a visualization platform for the indicators of the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. So what we'll do is we'll hear first from an organization, IUCN, that is an indicator provider, very much provides headline indicators under the BIP. I will then profile the origins of the dashboard technology that NatureServe developed, what we've done in the intermediate term in terms of integrating it as a BIP dashboard, and actually where we're going to go with it in the coming months based on some user feedback that we have. Then we'll hear from two users. One is Dr. Sheila Vergara from the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity in the Philippines. She unfortunately can't be online because she's in meetings in China right now, so you're going to have to hear me deliver her presentation. And then GoToMeeting Willie. We will go to my colleague, Mr. Julius Muzi at the National Environment Management Authority in Uganda for some closing thoughts. And then we'd like to use the remaining time to open it up to you. This is a developing platform. We're very open and interested in getting feedback and criticism, both from other people in the room that maybe are developing platforms. We're very much wanting to link. There's a whole ecosystem of platforms out there. We don't want to sort of claim that we're the only one, and we want to link wherever we can. But even more importantly, we're really interested in how we make that platform useful to users. So first up, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tom Brooks, who's the Chief Scientist of IUCN. And as I mentioned, IUCN is really a core member of the BIP. They produce a lot of very well-known headline indicators. And also, Tom, in his former life as Chief Scientist at NatureServe, was actually behind the origins of the dashboard. So if this session goes sideways, you can blame Tom. So Tom, please.
Splendid. Well, thank you very much, Mike. Good morning, everybody. A great pleasure to have a chance to contribute to this session on the Biodiversity Indicators Partnerships Dashboard program. It's really moved into the programmatic realm over the last couple of years. Let me start with some context, drawing from a number of threads that ran through various discussions yesterday, both here in the Eye on Earth symposium and in the World Data Forum. As we've heard, the incorporation of environmental sustainability at the same level as social and economic sustainability through the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is enormously important, but also represents a substantial challenge to many countries. There is a persistent shortfall in both experience, in capacity, and in data for tracking changes in the state of nature across many countries around the world. And that challenge faces not just national institutions, national statistical offices charged with monitoring progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals, but also at the level of individual line ministries monitoring the delivery of commitments towards multilateral environmental agreements. But all is not bleak. Happily, there are actually many decades of experience and of effort at both national and international levels that can be drawn from to help to support delivering these commitments, to understanding how countries are managing to progress towards achieving international environmental commitments. This first really came into play back in 2002 with the establishment of the first what was called the 2010 target for biodiversity through the Convention on Biological Diversity. And as it became clear, quite the size of the gap facing maintenance of biodiversity-related indicators at national levels. Colleagues in the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centre recognised the opportunity to establish a Biodiversity Indicators Partnership to help to make this connection between existing processes for maintaining indicators, for tracking the state of nature and threats to it and responses to ameliorate its decline, and the demand for those indicators, in particular from the national level, and also from other scales, from regional agreements and global levels. For the first maybe 10 years or so of the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership's work, it effectively functioned as a clearinghouse, as a mechanism for connecting between indicator processes and indicator demand. It maintained effectively the lists of indicators and underlying data sets, the contact details for the institutions involved, and a fairly slim set of metadata describing the indicators in question. Moving forward a decade or so. So I guess really only two or three years ago, a couple of really quite important modifications were put in place into the structure of how the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership is convened, organised by UNEP's World Conservation Monitoring Centre, and how it operates, how it functions. The first was actually revision of the governance mechanism around the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, to think through and classify more clearly the range of different types of institutions involved. Institutions serving as providers of indicators and the data sets underlying those from both national and global levels, and institutions using those indicators. Institutions again from both national and global levels, who drive the demand for indicators to report progress towards national targets. And so the revision of the governance structure of the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership placed a much greater emphasis onto the decision-making within the partnership on those institutions from whom who are providing the indicators and associated data, and then a clearer mechanism for making sure that there was the opportunity to hear from and to the opportunity for a flow of advice from institutions demanding, institutions using the data, and again across spatial scales. The other major change that's been put in place over the decision to forge ahead with this only came through maybe a year and a half ago or so, and that is what we're going to focus on today: the establishment of a Biodiversity Indicators Partnership dashboard. And this takes the idea of a clearinghouse or a linkage between biodiversity indicators production and use to a new level, to actually make sure that there's a mechanism in place to allow those the indicators and data underlying them themselves to flow between institutions and between geographic scales. The program to establish this dashboard has been led by NatureServe, as Mike mentioned. NatureServe serves a role both in providing data and indicators into the BIP itself, and also in supporting the development of the technology, of the platform to allow sharing of indicators between institutions. Very much looking forward to this discussion, and I think critically to hearing feedback from the Eye on Earth audience about the directions forward with the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership dashboards program. It's in, as we've emphasised, it's in early stages, and so the opportunity to influence it really does rest in front of us collectively. So very much look forward to the discussions, and Mike, back to you to tell us more. Biodiversity Indicators Partnership dashboards. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. That was great. So let's get into it. So what I'm going to do in the next half hour or so is just give you a little bit of context to what we see as the challenge or the problem that we're trying to solve here. And then I'd like to very briefly profile the origins of the dashboard with NatureServe, what we've done to date in the last few months in terms of skinning it to the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, but what we're actually going to turn it into based on the panel feedback that we've got from users around the world. And then after we hear from Dr. Vergara and Mr. Muzzi, we'd like to use whatever remaining time we have to get feedback. And of course, after the session, please come up to me, yell at me, whatever you need to do to tell me how we can make this better. So, no surprise, the governments around the world responding to the sixth extinction crisis have signed on to all sorts of different multilateral environmental agreements. Of course, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and they all generate reporting demands. We have 169 targets under the SDGs. We've got the 20 Aichi targets, and countries around the world are required to access information and produce reports on a regular schedule. And the question is how efficient is that, and how easily able are they to access that data? And while we're talking about visualizing indicators, it's always worth pointing out and picking up on a point that Tom made yesterday, is that we actually really struggle with the core data that we have. We try to bend over backwards, we do backflips to try and come up with insights using proxy indicators, but we really suffer in terms of actual quality data on the ground, so we can't forget that. So with this accelerating demand for biodiversity indicators to track progress and targets, we really lack evidence-based indicators in many of these processes. So the fourth national reports to the CBD, only 36% of them had even one evidence-based indicator in them. That's improved. Oops, I've got a slow network connection. Sorry, let's feel that. That's improved. However, with the fifth national reports, we randomly sampled 30 of them and found that there's only 20% of the indicators in those fifth national reports correspond with the recommended list of indicators that came out of the convention. So we have the BIP, we have these global indicators. How well are people actually using them? Do they believe in them? How do they access them? And of course, course, we have a static periodic assessment process. So I'm Canadian, and I used to work for the Canadian government. And I wasn't directly involved in this, but I know how it goes. You sort of every couple of years, you sort of go, oh, we have to get our national reports out. You get on the phone, you look around and try and access data as best you can. And with that, we have this overwhelming, overlapping process. So we tend to go to the same data sets over and over again in different ways to answer questions about how we're doing on a national level or a regional level or a global level. And because of that, we really have inefficiencies in terms of accessing data and indicators. And I think it's worth pointing out that there is other platforms like the UN Biodiversity Lab that we'll hear about tomorrow, which is a spatial data platform, which is there also to help with a lot of these reporting processes. The final one that I'm not sure we can solve with a dashboard, but more through making these connections, is that we hear all the time that with the global data sets we have, that governments do have some uncertainty or trust issues about how we actually downscale those to national levels. But we're learning a lot through working with our partners on solving that issue. So what this is we, as Tom's already mentioned, NatureServe had this dashboard technology. The BIP has been evolving over time and is focused more and more on how to actually serve national interests around indicator access. And so the idea about a year and a half ago was to bring together and merge the dashboard technology with the BIP. And this is a collaboration between the UN Environment's World Conservation Monitoring Center, which is based in Cambridge, which actually hosts the BIP Secretariat. I don't think I need to say too much more about the BIP, other than there is 64 partners in the BIP representing over 70 indicators to date. And the website is actually organized in a way where you can actually browse the indicators by Aichi Targets, by SDGs, by other multilateral environmental agreements, and so on, so you can actually discover and access indicators, but we're trying to take that a step further through this visualization platform. NatureServe, which I realize that as a Canadian, of course I know what NatureServe is, and I work for them, of course, now, but for most of the world, people don't know what NatureServe is. So it's a science-based NGO, largely operating through North, Central, and South America. So we have over 80 biodiversity data centers and natural heritage programs in these areas. And we're really working as a connected network to better understand species at risk and ecosystems at risk through these areas. But through that process, we have developed a lot of leading platforms and technologies for conservation data tools and services. So we're very much pivoting more towards an integrated approach where we go from data to decision. So data curation, acquisition, collection, to analysis, to visualization. And with that, we have the NatureServe dashboard, which is a visualization platform. So the dashboard started in 2011 through a very generous grant from the MacArthur Foundation. And they wanted to know whether the significant resources they were putting into their 3 priority regions were actually having any impact. Were they actually seeing some changes in the trajectory of decline of ecosystems? So they wanted to access evidence-based objective data sets and indicators to look at whether the rate of forest loss in the areas that they were actually funding was changing. And the answer actually, thankfully, was that they were having an impact. But it was a counterfactual way to actually look at whether they were making a difference. And from that, the platform was designed in a way that could easily be scaled. So it kind of moved from there to focus on a global aspect in terms of bringing in other indicators on trends. This is really focused on time series trend data. The original dashboard, which we now call the Dashboard Classic, is at this URL, and it's organized around the Aichi targets and the SDGs, as well as the Precious State Benefit Response framework. And we have country dashboard landing pages for all countries and territories that essentially summarize metrics for each country. So this is for the United Arab Emirates, looking at a number of different metrics that are pulled together and refreshed every so often to look at things like what proportion of species that are found within that territory are at risk, protected area status and percentage, and so on and so forth. And right now we have about 32 indicators in our library that are in that underlying dashboard platform. But as mentioned, we wanted to actually merge that with the BIP. So what we wanted to do was avoid what we often do, and I've certainly been guilty of this myself, where you come up with a great idea, you build a solution, and then you look for a problem. So you sort of go around and you tell everybody this is great and you're going to love this. And we really wanted to actually cut to the chase and ask, what do our perceived users want? And our perceived users were very clear. We wanted to support streamlined reporting, national reporting, and regional reporting. So we assembled a multi-user panel from these 8 countries to advise us on what do they want. So these are folks that are working in different agencies that are responsible for national reports and also SDG reporting. So we had a series of webinars as well as one-on-one interviews, and we hired a design consultant called Green Info Network to develop wireframes based on their advice and iteratively test and run with this how we're going to develop this platform. And that's been an extremely illuminating process. And what I'm about to show you is what we started with, and then I'll show you how we're radically changing the dashboard, because it blew us away what people wanted. I was completely wrong about what I thought people wanted. So our main focus is on streamlining national reporting for the multilateral environmental agreements as well as the SDGs. But what we heard from our panel members is that they could actually use the dashboard for all sorts of other applications, such as identifying key conservation issues, prioritizing efforts, tracking the impacts of conservation policy, establishing current and historical baselines, and also informing subnational assessments and planning. So can I actually downscale some of these indicators to look at what's happening within a certain part of my country? So you can go to the URL, the BIPindicators.net, that's the BIP website, and you just go to the top right of the screen, click on the dashboard. Right now you'll see only 6 indicators on there, but by about next week, once we get approval from the indicator providers, we'll have another at least 5. So this is rapidly developing. We're adding more and more data sets. It's also highlighted on the CBD website, because again, we see this as serving multiple purposes, but as well as supporting the parties to developing their 6 national reports. So just a quick profile of what the dashboard looks like now, and then I'll show you where we're going with it. So right now, it's actually not really a dashboard, it's an interactive global map. And that was one of the first responses we got from our panels. How is this a dashboard? That's an interactive map. And so we have things like the cumulative human impacts on marine environment indicator at a global scale, and you can click on and explore the targets, and we'll be adding SDGs to this. And you can also link on and explore the metadata as a summary, but you can also click on the links to go to an indicator fact sheet, which gives you much more detailed metadata about that indicator. That was very important to our panelists. We have standardized symbologies, so you have a legend that shows you the rate of change for that particular indicator. And you can actually go to specific countries and visualize the trend or the time series data. So for the UAE, we see that over time, actually, the impacts on the marine environment are declining, which is a good news story for this part of the world. You can download all these time series graphs in different formats and put them in your reports. Just another example is the Biodiversity Habitat Index from CSIRO in Australia. This integrates records, species occurrence data from GBIF with global forest change data sets. I keep getting these error boxes that I have to remove on the screen. That show how biodiversity habitat quality is changing over time. You can scale this at a national level for a place like Turkey. You can also scale it down to basin levels, so you can look at different sub-basin levels in different parts of the world to look at what the trends are in that model-based indicator. And finally, I'll just quickly profile the protected area coverage of key biodiversity indicators. This is an indicator that comes from BirdLife, IUCN, and WCMC, and the data sources from them to look at how we see trends in protected area coverage of key biodiversity areas, which is a really nice, simple, but very powerful approach to asking where do we go, where do we actually protect the most important areas. And so you can scale that nationally, you can also scale it by SDG regions, and you can also disaggregate it and visualize it. So this is for the SDG Western Asia and Northern Africa region to look at the trends in protected area coverage for key biodiversity areas. And you can also, of course, do this at the national level. So that's just a bit of a flyby. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but get into actually where we're going with this. So in summary, and we heard a lot more than this, but if I could boil it down to 6 or 7 key points, our panelists said, great, I love your map, we'll use it, it's no problem, but really, just cut to the chase for me. I want to see my country first and my neighbors second. I want to actually search by theme first. This was an interesting one. We thought that Aichi targets and SDGs were the first layer that they would want to search for. So no, for me it's mostly about forests or fisheries. I'm not saying I'm not interested in the Aichi targets and SDGs, but I have other issues that drive my day-to-day work that I should be able to find these indicators by. A lot of our partners obviously have slow internet, so they didn't want to have a global map that loads slowly. They want a very simple, not flashy tool. So this is really, what we heard was no flash, all substance, build me a tool that gives me a specific output. They want the methodology close at hand. They want to be able to vet that indicator. They want to be able to download the images as well as the data and the CSV files. And they want to sort of structure it in a way that the simple, most important things are discovered first, and then you go into the deeper levels as you go. And finally, avoid journeys to no results. So on our global platform, we have indicators that cover and wrap the world, but there are some countries where we really don't have any data. And so the worst thing when you're browsing the web is that you actually go, oh, there's nothing here for me. I just spent 5 minutes to find nothing about my country. So these are just wireframes. This is what we'll be implementing, a redesign of the BIP dashboard. And the next month, we'll do a lot of this. And the next 3 months, we'll have it all the time. But essentially, you'll have a very simple front end that can load very quickly, and you can search by UNEP regions, or if you want, you can jump to the global map. You can then click on that sub-region or that UNEP region and jump to your country, where you can just simply type it in, and it will tell you how many indicators are available, so what data sets you have for that country, so that if you're in Chad, you realize there's nothing there for me, I don't need to go any further. We then have the theme search, where you can actually search the indicators by theme, and you can actually then jump into a particular theme and look at the indicators that are available, and then they are mapped by Aichi target, SDGs, and MEAs, so that you can see what the cross linkages are. You then can actually click on and visualize as a graph the time series trend in that particular indicator for your country. You can then drop it and click and compare it to other countries in your region or anywhere around the world, or by global averages. And you can also visualize this in a map-based layer. So we want to also still be able to jump to, say, if you're in Algeria, you can actually visualize this map for Algeria. And as you can see, we don't have the symbologies on in terms of the heat maps yet, but you can get the idea of where this is going. And then finally, we wanted to sort of add in some other features that were asked for in terms of being able to compare at a geographic, regional scale some of the features that are in place. So that's kind of a very quick, brief flyby of the BIP dashboard, what we currently have, where we're going with it. Again, we very much want feedback from all of you, both during the session but afterwards. But maybe we should now move to the next presentation, which is by my colleague, Dr. Vergara. So Dr. Vergara, she's with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Center for Biodiversity, which is in the Philippines. And she's been a strong partner and proponent of the dashboard for a number of years, and she's also actually been one of our panelists. So this presentation was produced by her. So for those of you that might not be familiar with the ASEAN region, it involves 10 member countries. That was formed in 1967, so the member states are Brunei, Dar es Salaam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Its current population is around 700 million people and a combined GDP of about 2.57 trillion. But more importantly, perhaps from a biodiversity perspective, is that this region covers about 3% of the Earth's surface, but they contain an estimated 19% of all biodiversity found around the world. And the ASEAN member states, just like most parts of the world, have signed on to a number of different multilateral environmental agreements. It varies, but they all have reporting demands that come with that. So the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity has been supporting the regional efforts around producing good data to track progress on these agreements through things like the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook Report. So the first Outlook Report really had limited readership. It was produced as kind of a scientific volume that was distributed. And what they found was it wasn't very policy friendly. People were given the book and it wasn't really read. So over time, as they developed further iterations, and so this is the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook 2 report, they focused more on how they actually can translate the important trends in biodiversity to policymakers. So they organized it around the precious state benefit response. They brought in more visualizations around graphs, maps, and narratives, and they brought in policy reports around that. So basically telling policymakers, this is the problem, this is what you can do about it. And where they're going now is the ASEAN Biodiversity Outlook 3 report will be developed soon. As with the other ones, it's developed in part using the national reports from the ASEAN member states. They want to make this an online publication with real-time map trends and graphs. So they want to work with the dashboard and the BIP dashboard to actually turn their biodiversity indicators and data to life so that they can actually have a much more friendly platform for bringing that information to the policymakers and to those that have to develop reporting platforms. And this is just an example of, these are some of the country reports that are in our original dashboard. And what we found is that people are actually embedding those links into their own clearinghouse mechanisms. Vietnam has done that, Cook Islands and others. And they would like to actually work on and build and expand on some of those country dashboard layers so that for the ASEAN region, we can access and summarize indicators by country. And the same with others, looking at things like mangrove cover extent and looking at changes in time through that. So just to end, one of the key important focus for the ASEAN region right now is around the establishment and the better management of protected areas. And so Sheila wanted to really highlight this, that the protected area coverage of key biodiversity areas is a really core indicator for them. It's very simple to basically translate into policy practice. It's a great way to actually prioritize where we should be going in terms of protected area coverage networks. And they would like to work with those indicator partners and the dashboard visualization to do that. And so essentially, the message here is that Sheila is very keen on working on these visualization platforms for the ASEAN region. She's sorry that she couldn't be here today, but I can try and direct questions to her after that. So thanks very much. And now we'll end it with Julius, however you get Julius online. Hopefully you can hear me. Yep. And I'll just introduce Julius again. So Mr. Muizi is at the National Environment Management Authority of Uganda. He's been a core panelist from the BIP dashboard. He's been extremely helpful in guiding how it develops over time. And he's a GIS and spatial analyst expert in Uganda. So if you could turn it on. There's a problem?
No.
Okay.
Can you talk?
Hello?
Oh, hi, Julius, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, that's Mike, only that I have some kind of issues with the audio from that side, especially from the presentation that you made. But I don't know whether audible enough, you can hear me well.
Yeah, we can hear you great. So please go ahead, Julius.
Hello? You can hear me well?
Yes.
So the audience can get me well?
Can you type yes on chat too? Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me, Julius, but we can hear you fine. So please go ahead.
Hello? Hello?
Just, are you sending in the chat? You gotta love technology.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Yeah, this is Julius from Uganda. First of all, I would like to thank Mike for that presentation and also to remotely link me as a representative from National Environment Management Authority and who actually and who are really optimistic and eagerly waiting to actually make the best use out of the BIP dashboard, which will actually be of great use, especially in improving and supporting both national and international reporting requirements, which we are obliged to, especially the CPD, the SDGs, and other multi-environment agreements, which are here we are signatory to, and we are mandatory to actually annually and also at national level report on, especially some of these indicators which respond to the targets. I would like to actually briefly bring to your attention about Uganda. Uganda is incredibly rich in biodiversity, given its small size in Africa, and actually a variety of species and ecosystems and the resulting genetic diversity in Uganda actually present an economic opportunity as well as being of the conservation value to the nation. So therefore, we really thank the big team, especially Mike and the team, of which we actually collaborating with since we are part of the multilateral panel developing the dashboard, especially so that can actually be user-based needs considered, especially involving some of these tools and indicators. Maybe to first of all point out, I'd like to inform the audience that the big among its kind of tasks in terms of developing this tool, this application, also is looking into leading or supporting us as member states, like for example Uganda, involving some of these indicators. We have really challenges to really be able to report on the status and trends of some of these biodiversity kind of resources because of the gaps in terms of trying to whether our indicators are effective or ineffective, therefore evaluating the tool, and as well as trying to emphasize that this platform will be of great use both at national, sub-national reporting requirements, because currently as a national environment management authority responsible for managing biodiversity in Uganda, there are some gaps, challenges, especially in terms of how we grow to manage our data, biodiversity data, such that it can actually be a one-stop kind of entry point for biodiversity data that will be able to be available and visualized by different stakeholders, and also trying to report and also meet our kind of reporting requirements, both at global, meeting the global targets, and also national targets, such that we can be able to measure the progress, whether we are achieving some of these targets or we are, we need more kind of efforts. Therefore, the BIP is actually will be a very useful platform, especially in Uganda here, to streamline, to strengthen and improve our both sub-national, national, and regional and global reporting requirements, especially since it is actually also leading into trying to book these indicators that are really targeting some of these kind of targets, especially meeting the progress of some, especially within member states. And also at national and regional level, Uganda is really holds or shares some kind of transboundary resources like the River Nile, Lake Victoria, and all these all are rich in freshwater, kind of biodiversity. So therefore, trying to develop this tool, which is actually user-driven, will help us to actually look at how other kind of regions who share that kind of resources will be able to whether they are achieving some of these kind of targets and where things are not well and how can be done, and also improve in terms of ensuring that our biodiversity is actually best monitored and managed in terms of use. So we're really grateful and hoping that right from the completion of the development of this tool, we shall really benefit a lot in tracking and reporting on some of these national, and also the challenges we've been having of developing such tools that are really interactive and be able to communicate and report on the status of clinical biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Anyways, why don't we open it up for questions, comments, critiques. We'll start with David. And you need to use a microphone so people on the webinar can hear.
Great, thanks. David Jensen, from Environment. Two quick questions. One, you talked about the dashboard technology. Can you let me know, or let the audience know, is that technology like an open source product? Is it available? Can we use it in other applications? And what's it based on? And then the second question is for our colleague in Uganda. Can you walk us through how data is taken out of the BIP into like a 6 national reporting process? Like, how does it get vetted and then basically internalized within a 6 national report, just so we can understand, how it gets domesticated and taken in? Thanks so much.
All right, so the answer to the first question around what we use for the backend platform, so it's an Esri ArcGIS online system. So it's not open source, as you know, but the access to the actual information and the use of the dashboard is freely available, of course.
So the dashboard itself is an
Yes.
Esri.
Yeah, that's right. And Julius, did you hear that question?
Oh yeah, I think I've actually just started getting this audio from the office, but I just found when you were trying to respond, I didn't get it well from the audience by the time the connection was okay on that side. But perhaps I can respond to other questions, or they can, if it's possible, I can be able to repeat and then be able to apply it well.
Okay, so can you repeat the question? Yeah, do that.
Sure. So just basically, can you just walk us through how a country takes the data that's in the BIP and then internalizes it into its 6 national report? Like, what's the process to decide if the data that's contained by the BIP is basically, if it's vetted and if it's sufficient quality to be put inside the national report? Does it go through another vetting process, or how does it work? How does the workflow work between getting the data out of the BIP and putting it into a national report?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I've got the question well. Maybe just to let you know that the data that actually is fed into the BIP dashboard is nationally collected, especially since we are mandated to be able to continuously collect and report on some of these targets. So the data actually will be collected from, for example, Uganda, and then the BIP government team will help us to be able to develop these indicators that we shall continuously reporting on. And then the beauty with the dashboard, so far as I've seen, it's that you can download some of these outputs through graphical maps and this visual, and then be able to integrate with our national reporting. And for information, for example, the national reporting 6, we are looking forward to actually be able to use some of these outputs that perhaps will be able to communicate the status and trends of biodiversity, CBD, and other kind of multi-environment agreements. So outputs eventually, since we upload the data in form of the indicators tracking, and then the tools that the team is helping us to develop so we can measure these targets, and then ultimately we download the outputs and embed them in the reports. Yeah, that's the loop that actually we are looking at is ultimately.
And maybe I can just add to that answer. It's what we heard from our panel is it depends. So every country is different. We always hope that there's a one-size-fits-all solution. I'm sure you're well aware of this. But for instance, our panelist in China, who's responsible for leading the development of the 6 national report, he looks at the BIP dashboard and he says, "Well, I'm going to pick. There's indicators in there I like. There's other ones I don't. I have 62 national indicators of my own that are going into the national report for China." So his approach is to actually vet those indicators and pull the ones he wants. But he's actually interested in whether he can gain access to time series visualizations. So can we give him a platform that he can password? He can jump in on a password and pull up data. And that's very easy, of course, to do spatially with shape files. It's more complicated with time series trend data, but it is possible. And that might be a user need that we need to serve as well.
Thank you very much. And I'm Andrea from South Africa. I think this is an interesting and exciting initiative. We currently are looking at somehow implementing similar solutions, but not only for biodiversity related indicators, but for broader state of the environment reporting, obviously you will have biodiversity as one of the themes. But as I was processing the information, I think what I needed to understand better was the role of your panelists. Because like you indicated that every country is different, would you have every country represented in that particular group, and what would be their terms of reference? Just to get a sense of how you get to a point of approving the indicators. I'm assuming it's done through the process, so I just want to confirm my assumptions that those are your key people that assist in making sure that the tools are developed, the methodologies, the service to be provided, but also then how do they take into account the differences in different countries?
Great, thank you very much for that question. So, well, with our panelists, we had 8 countries represented, plus we reached out. Actually, we had one-on-one interviews with people at Zambia and South Africa and Colombia and Arctic Council as well. So the guidance there was maybe twofold. There was, the panelists largely focused on how do we actually design this platform to serve a very specific output that they want. So there was a lot of that. But then we also got a lot of feedback on the content. So what are these indicators? Where do they come from? How do I trust them? All that sort of thing. And we couldn't, of course, ask everybody around the world in a 3-month process, so we sort of tried to get a geographic representative panel that represented countries with different focuses, capacities, and so forth. But on the indicators themselves, the BIP does have a vetting process by which an indicator is approved. So if you want to be a BIP partner and/or your indicator that you may have developed, you want it to become an official BIP indicator, it has to go to a steering committee, which actually has some criteria to vet that. Having said that, that doesn't mean, therefore, every country should just carte blanche take those indicators and use them. We really see this as a pick and choose platform. And I'm very interested in advice and ideas on how we bridge that trust gap between these global data sets, which a lot of them are, for their use at national. At this point, all we've been able to do, and based on the guidance we've got from our panelists, to give as detailed as possible metadata. What is this indicator? What's the methodology? What are the data sources? But that's kind of as far as we've gotten. And with technology is great for a lot of things. I'm not sure it's so great at breaking down trust barriers. So that's maybe more of a process. One thing that we would like to do is track the use of the BIP dashboard so that we can see, and again, the people that use this, they're the ultimate experts. They're the ones that decide what they want to believe in or not. If we can actually track that and have sort of storyboards and ideas of what indicators are being used, what's the fit for purpose for these indicators, then we need to provide that. So that's really a job, I think, for more of the BIP partnership to provide storylines and fit for purpose, how these indicators can and cannot be used. But we need to make that very clear and accessible through the dashboard. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but that's the best I can do.
Thank you, Mike. I'm sorry I wasn't here from the start, but I missed that one. Is the SDGs indicator is being, aligned with the Aichi's and, the biodiversity indicator listed in the system? This is my first question. The second one is the capacity building component. How, you build capacity of the people who are going to use this system. Is it there is something online so they can really know how to use it, how to develop the indicator, what is the data required for the indicator, and all of this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So on your first question around the SDGs and the Aichi targets, if I understand it correctly, what we've done is every indicator in the BIP, so if you go to the BIP website, every indicator is mapped to SDGs, to Aichi targets, to other MEAs, and to other themes. The same on the BIP dashboard. So as a new indicator gets onto the dashboard to be visualized, you can search for it in multiple ways. You can get to it by theme, by country, by Aichi target, by SDG, and sub-targets as well. So I think hopefully that answers your question. Now on the capacity building side, this is early days. We just started this in June. But we recognize that it's not just a matter of, put it up online and everyone uses it, right? So there's a few strategies there. We want to actually keep a relationship going with our panelists as regional ambassadors for the platform. So actually the BIP dashboard was just profiled in a meeting in Nairobi, I believe, last week, a regional capacity building workshop where people were shown the dashboard and how it works. So we want to actually sort of piggyback on some of the convention biological diversity, regional capacity building workshops, other platforms, maybe through SDG processes by which we can actually sort of spread the word and support people on how they use this. We also plan to have, video training, so quick sort of fly through on how you can use the platform. But the BIP Secretariat, which is at WCMC in Cambridge, plays a central role to that. So those folks are there to answer questions and support countries and agencies in actually the use of indicators. So we've seen that already. The BIP Secretariat's been responding to requests from China and Uganda and other countries to help them with the 6 national reports and how to pull these indicators together. But we hope that this platform becomes a shortcut tool that makes it a little bit easier to actually quickly access and assemble that indicator data for a particular region or country.
Hi, Mike. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Julius.
Oh yeah, I had just got lost from that side, but now I'm back. Maybe an interesting question from the lady from South Africa. She mentioned about how the state of environment and then how the indicators in terms of how do we, in terms of identification. Now, just experience from Uganda, I coordinate the preparation process of the National State of Environment Report, of which we have indicators, national indicators that actually based on to yearly to measure and then report on, the status of the different kind of biodiversity. Now, an example could be how these indicators were, is a participatory kind of, process from the different sectors in the country, like in other agencies where they have different kind of indicators in their sectors. For example, Forest Authority from Uganda Wildlife Authority, which they track continuously, which now becomes an integral kind of process, which will make use of report and prepare the National State of Environment report. Similarly, the BIP dashboard actually, since the indicators will come from the member states like Uganda, that will be assisted in, supported in by the BIP team to report the indicators. Then we shall be able to extract information or outputs from the BIP that still will feed into the national reports. And among them are the state of environment reports, the thematic reports from the different sectors. So this tool actually will be able to support the national governments, especially trying to report on in terms of improving our access to outputs, information about these indicators we're tracking, and then report on continuously at national and both international kind of preparation. So it will definitely fit into our kind of assistance in terms of improving and accessing this kind of information.
Great, thanks, Julius. You got a thumbs up for that answer.
So thank you very much for the presentations. Maybe these are topics for discussion or more than questions, but wondering if you discuss a little bit about the difference in the approach to the platform with data versus indicators. You get a lot more flexibility out of dealing with data because then the data can be utilized to generate different types of indicators and even future indicators and backtrack those indicators. So whether things like the algorithms are actually held with you guys on the platform and whether data is held on the platform versus just people reporting the actual calculated indicator. So maybe you could discuss that. The other point I was going to make is a comment you made in your presentation was you used to work for Canadian government, and like so many governments, when it comes to generating reports, we're oftentimes looking at, oh, it's time to create that report again, and so oftentimes it's dated past data, right? So it's 2 years old. It becomes an exercise to generate a report. And I'm a bit concerned we might be missing the point, which is actually an indicator at the national level might be much more useful as a management tool, right? And should we be talking more about whether it's a BIP or whether it's other platforms could be utilized as decision support tools versus a reporting mechanism, and whether there's flexibility in platforms that might be able to serve both purposes at a time instead of always sort of looking backwards. So that's that. And Todd, you have your hand.
Yeah, two really quick additional points to those excellent discussion questions on the underlying data. So one obvious short-term stopgap is simply to link back through to the underlying data sets, so that even if not through the BIP directly, there's a mechanism for users to go back down through to the underlying data. And for the indicators for adaptive management relative to indicators for reporting, that maybe relates to a point that you raised earlier, Mike, about the possibilities of reporting indicators of impact and showing not just the actual trends but also the counterfactuals. I wonder if there's been any discussion of that in the panel and the potential to build indicators of genuine impact into the dashboard, which would be the mechanism to feed towards adaptive management.
Right. So, not so much in terms of the counterfactual analysis, at least unless Julius can jump in if I've missed this, but I don't believe we've had much discussion, but we've had interest from others on whether we can use this platform to support counterfactual in places like Cambodia and others. So that's definitely a possibility, and I think it's badly needed, whether you're a government or a foundation or a conservation NGO, for instance.
I actually had a similar related question, but I was going to reserve it because I was also thinking that the dashboard would then be more of your reporting your trends. But what we are hoping to do with then your state of the environment reporting process was then to go beyond the trends, which would then be in the dashboard, and try to look at now the impact and the outcome indicators now in that process. But in terms of how to do it, it's always a bit challenging because you get fewer people getting to that level of the impact and the outcome reporting process versus then the dashboard. So the majority are then still stuck in the dashboard related reporting, and some make decisions based on the dashboard. But how to move the majority to that higher level reporting process, that's what we're battling with, and to say how do we link the two processes so that people get to understand the purpose of this one, which is your dashboard, versus the key tool that is meant for then decision-making purposes. Whether are we really benefiting in terms of what we're implementing, are we reaping the benefits when we try checking the impact and the outcome?
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more, and maybe that's an area that we need to seriously consider. I mean, we focused on it, but what we didn't want to do is be all things to all people, so we focused on streamlining the reporting process. But maybe that's an extension that we should really consider is working with all these different partners and very smart, innovative people at national level and in global organizations. How do we actually bring those multiple lines of evidence to actually assess and evaluate our impact? Yeah, absolutely.
Hello, Ben Triconi, UNFWCC. I saw you mentioned the MEA reporting as well, Ramsar, CMS and so on, linked there. I was wondering, partly because Ramsar convention's happening just next door, and some of us will be going down there to talk about their online reporting, how you see the BIP dashboard linking into that?
Well, we were certainly interested in doing that. We haven't yet had much conversations with conventional wetlands about this, but we think it's an easy extension. There are lots of course, relevant indicators in the BIP that relate to wetlands in terms of pressure and state benefit response that we can bring into that. It's not through lack of interest, it was just trying to pick a policy user group that we could focus on, and the CBD is a good one for all sorts of reasons, as Tom mentioned yesterday. This is a very timely time with the post-2020 strategy coming up, but we absolutely see opportunities to support the other conventions such as the wetlands and CMS and so on and so forth.